The final approach to value is going to be the income approach. Now, using the income approach, there's actually two ways that we do this, the capitalization method or the gross rent multiplier. So even though I told you this was the final approach, there's actually going to be two math questions associated with this. The first one is by far the most difficult, probably the most difficult math question that you're going to deal with in this chapter. Now, having said that, it's actually just memorization. So if you just memorize our little formula, then what will happen is after that you just plug numbers into place and hope something good happens. So when we're talking about the income approach, we're talking about income producing properties, like an apartment building or something to that effect, where the value of the building is based on what it brings in. There's actually a very simple formula that goes along with this. The formula is NOI, which stands for net operating income, divided by CR, capitalization rate, equals value. Okay, net operating income, focus on the word net, what you have left after you've paid expenses. Capitalization rate, probably a word you're not going to understand right away, but capitalization rate speaks to what a investor wants to return on the property. Think of it that way and you'll be fine. And then of course value, what is this chapter about? This chapter is about determining value of properties, and so that's what we're trying to find here. If in fact you do like acronyms, one of the most common acronyms used in real estate is IRV. Income equals rate times value. Okay, and of course you see there income divided by rate equals value. So if you like using a T-bar, you can do that. That's the formula for the income approach. The problem is getting to that number right there is where the most complicated portion of this comes in. I want to walk you through the vocabulary, but as I'm walking you through the vocabulary, I want to show as well, I'll make up an apartment complex to go along with this. So here's the formula that you want to remember on how to determine NOI. Now when determining NOI, I first want you to think about GPI, your gross potential income. Now if you have an apartment complex, your gross potential income, that is how much you could make if everybody paid every month on time. That's your gross potential income. So let's do a simple example of this. You have a 50-unit apartment complex and the rents are $800. And when you're doing these problems, you actually go ahead and annualize it as well. So in this case, 50 units times $800 per month, that's what the rent is, times 12 would be $480,000. Mm-hmm. $480,000. Now, let me remind you, what that tells you is your gross potential income. First of all, are you really going to collect that? Is everybody really going to pay on time every month? Are you going to have some units that are vacant at some point? So gross potential, that's awesome, but you're never going to collect that amount because everyone is going to have minus vacancy and credit loss. Vacancy means vacant. You can't collect rents on it when it's vacant. Credit loss means somebody left and didn't pay their rent, wrote you a bad check, stuff like that. Usually this is expressed as a percentage. So let's say in this case that the vacancy and credit loss is 5%. It's just uncollectible is what it amounts to. So 5% of $480,000 looks like it's going to be about $24,000. Lisa, check me on that math real quick just to make sure I'm correct. Mm-hmm. Okay, so you're just not going to collect 5% of it, okay? So gross potential minus vacancy and credit loss brings us to our next vocabulary word, which is gross effective income. GEI, gross effective income. Okay, well it's still gross, meaning you haven't paid any bills yet, but at least this is money that you touched. You actually collected that amount of money. So 456 is good, but now let's go start paying some bills. So when we look at our next line is going to be expenses. Now let me remind you, these are expenses for running the building. This does not include things like your debt service. Your debt service is actually what you pay for the money that you borrowed to buy the building. It also doesn't take into consideration things like depreciation or interest or things like that. These are the expenses of the building. So let's see if we can name a few. The management company, maintenance, repairs, obviously we go into that as well. Attorney's fees, accounting fees, these are expenses that it costs to run the building. I'm going to make up a number here that's probably around, I don't know, 25%. What's 25% of that number right there, Lisa? 116,000?
114?
114,000? 114,000? Okay, I just made that up. 114,000. Obviously, in the problem, we will either give it to you or give it away of determining what the expenses are. Now, watch this. Gross minus expenses, in this case, $342,000, is what we refer to as your net operating income. Your net operating income. Do you remember that from the very start of this particular video? And that we said our formula to determine the value of an income producing property is net operating income divided by cap rate equals value. Well, what if I told you in this area that the cap rate is 10%? Now all of a sudden you have an easy formula. 342 net divided by cap rate given. I either gave it to you or we gave you a way of determining what it was, equals $3,420,000. Boom. And also keep in mind, this is the valuation section. So what is it we've just determined? We've determined in an area that has 10% cap rates, just like you do a CMA on a building, that's the way you could figure out the cap rates for an area. You figure out what they sold for and what the income was, and you could figure out the cap rate. So you would do it just like a CMA on sales. But if we know it's 10% in this area, and we know what the net operating income is, we can determine that that's about what we're going to sell this property for, $3.42 million. That's the income approach.